Welcome to the What's Important Now broadcast. In America today, we are witnessing a cultural shift. This is the show devoted to the battle for the soul of our country. Join our host, Tom Sears, as he explains the issues of our day and join the fight to bring values and morality back. Let's join Tom now as he shares what's important now.
And welcome inside of What's Important Now. I'm Tom Sears. Before we jump in, I want to encourage you, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Spreaker, or anywhere podcasts are found, hit that subscribe button. It helps you stay connected, and, well, it helps us keep the truth in front of more people. And for our FM listeners, welcome. We encourage you to also go to the podcasting platforms where we offer other additional programs, episodes, etc. Finally, if this program matters to you, consider joining our supporter club on Spreaker. It's just $5 a month, and it helps us continue to produce faith-driven commentary at a time when it's needed more than ever. And if you can't join right now, you can still support us by, again, subscribing and sharing this program with others. What's Important Now is produced and is a part of Legacy Living Media, where truth, purpose, and conviction meet. And today we continue our series, America at a Crossroads. And today I want to talk to you about the war for the next generation. At some point in this program, my daughter, my youngest, Faith Danielle, is going to join us. She is a part of Turning Point USA as co-president of one of their chapters, and I want to talk to her because she is the next generation. She represents the next generation, and I want to talk with her. So listen, every great nation rises or falls on what it passes down to its children. And it was Abraham Lincoln who said, and this is not an exact quote, that if you want to see what politics will look like, what the world will look like in the next generation, he said, you go to the classrooms, you look to the next generation. Right now, America is in a battle, and it's not just policies, and it's not just politics, but it's for the hearts, the minds, and the souls of the next generation. So let's get into it. Let's start with reality here. The next generation isn't just drifting from truth. They're sprinting away from it. And the numbers, they simply do not lie. According to the American Worldview Inventory, only 4% of young adults in America now hold a biblical worldview. 4%. That's not a decline. Ladies and gentlemen, that is collapse. I remember when back in 2006, I became the senior pastor at New Beginnings Church, and I can remember stepping up on my porch at my home, and there was a little postcard, and it was, I forget who it was from, but it said on there that by the time your children are teenagers, only 4% of them will believe in a biblical worldview. And so I've thought about that from time to time, and so I dig a little deeper. Truth is, well, it's true. In the early 2000s, around 70% of young adults identified as Christian. Today, that number has dropped to around 42%, and the decline in faith or of faith is staggering. Church attendance amongst teens is the lowest it's been in modern history. Fewer young people are praying. Fewer young people are reading scripture or even believing in absolute moral truth. Here's another alarming trend. A growing number of teenagers now identify as having no meaning or no purpose in life. Think about that and how sad that is. No meaning and no purpose in life. What are we doing? When I say we, I'm talking about the adults. We're supposed to lead them. We're supposed to guide them. What are we doing? It's unbelievable to me. And so what we see is mental health disorders exploding. Anxiety and depression have doubled in a single decade. Suicide rates among youth have climbed to more than 60% since 2007. And I want to tell you something, and like it or not, some kids are just mean anymore. And again, and the majority of that is not their fault. It's the upbringing. I was having a conversation with someone just the other day, and I said, listen, when you have kids, I want you to remember this. If you never remember anything else I ever say, remember this. Your home is training camp. The way you raise your children is important. And I told them they will be you 20 years later, because they're not going to do what you say. They're going to do what you do. And what you do is who you are. Does that make sense? So what's happening? Why the collapse? We talk a lot about this on this program. Why the collapse? Well, we have identity confusion. We've raised an entire generation in a world that tells them you can be whoever you want, your feelings define truth, and nothing is absolute. That might sound empowering to some, but it leaves kids without anchors. And without anchors, you drift. We live in a society, in a system today that increasingly excludes faith and rather promotes ideology. We see a lot of people talking about activism and playing identity politics, and all of this is happening. And in some cases, parents have been pushed to the sidelines while the system steps in to define the values of children. Here's the other thing. The power of digital discipleship. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if there is a greater danger to our kids than what is happening in the digital world. Today, kids aren't being shaped by parents. They're not being shaped by pastors. They're not being shaped by teachers. They're being discipled by algorithms. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. These platforms, they shape emotions. They shape beliefs. They shape addictions. And ultimately, they shape identity. Think about this, and this is staggering. It's estimated that the average teen spends 7 to 9 hours a day on a screen and only 4 minutes a day in a meaningful conversation with a parent. That's not a battle. That's a war. It's not accident either. And the enemy, he's not hiding. He's using distractions, confusion, deception to target our next generation. And if the family is the foundation of the nation, and you can go back and listen to some of our other programs, we've talked about the breakdown of the family. But if the family is the foundation of a nation, the next generation is the frame. And right now, the frame is shaking. This is America at a crossroads. And who our children become will determine the road that America takes. So we talk about collapse, but we need to understand what is driving it. First, there's a breakdown of childhood itself. Kids can't be kids anymore. They're growing up faster. They're maturing slower. Innocence is actually being stolen early. Sexualized content, violent gaming, identity confusion. It's not showing up when they're 16 years old, but rather at the age of 9, 10, and 11 years old. The other thing is the rejection of objective truth. We used to say you're entitled to your own opinion, but not to your own set of facts. But today, facts, well, they're optional. Truth is whatever you want it to be. As I've said many, many times, truth is no longer absolute. And when truth becomes personal, morality becomes meaningless. And a society can survive bad laws. It can survive hard times. But it cannot survive the destruction of truth. How about the normalization of brokenness? We've gone from acknowledging pain to celebrating it. From healing wounds to glorifying them. From helping kids overcome their challenges to teaching them that their weakness is their identity. What about the collapse in community? In 1990, the average American had close relationships with 5 to 7 people they saw weekly. Today, for many Gen Z, that number is 0. Loneliness has been declared an epidemic. And lonely people are vulnerable people. And then, of course, and we talk about it so much on this program because it is so important, the absence of spiritual leadership. In many homes, there's no longer prayer. There's no longer Bible reading. There's no longer church attending. And no one talks about the things of God. And when faith leaves the home, darkness will fill that space. So what does all of this mean? It means that the next generation is walking through life with no compass, no foundation, no identity, and no spiritual covering. And when a generation loses its foundation, a nation begins to lose its future. God has not surrendered this generation. He is not done. It is not too late. Not if we fight. And with that, I want to welcome inside of What's Important Now, my daughter, Faith Danielle.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So for longtime listeners of What's Important Now, I'm actually going to dig this out at some point, but for longtime listeners, way back when Faith was, well, a little younger than she is now, she was on the program. And I asked her, I said, do you want to say anything? And she was like, yes. So we did like a little intro. And she said, you're listening to the What's Important Now program with my dad, Tom Sears. Do you know Jesus? If you don't, you better find him. Now let's get back to the program. And I'll never forget that. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So we're talking here today, Faith, about, honestly, the battle or the war over the next generation. I look to you as someone who is a part of the next generation. And, you've had your own experiences as well. We've talked about things like identity confusion. We've talked about a system that continues to exclude faith and promote their own ideology. We've talked about the power of digital discipleship and what that looks like as it relates to like TikTok and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and all the stuff that's out there. And we've talked about, right before you came on, the breakdown of childhood itself, the rejection of objective truth, the normalization of brokenness, the collapse of community, and the absence of spiritual leadership. And I know you feel very strongly about these things because, well, you're the co-president of one of the chapters of Turning Point USA, motivated to be a part of that after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so on September 10th, 2025, I remember being in my house. I do online schooling through Liberty University, and I found out that Charlie Kirk had been shot. I remember messaging you and asking if you knew who that was. You replied and said yes, and then we found out shortly after that he had passed away. I was devastated. It really shocked me. I've been watching him for at least a year now, but I watched him daily. And he really inspired me to stand up and speak out for my generation, especially, but also for the world that is so, we have so many issues with identity, like you were talking about, comparison and loneliness, the political attack that we have on our nation, and especially my generation. And I'm very passionate about that. So this just caused me to look into how I could get involved more with Turning Point USA. And I took that initiative to reach out to them after I heard Erica Kirk's speech a couple days after he had passed away. And I remember during her speech, she looked at the camera and she said, "I'm talking to the generation, to the young kids who know that you need to be a part of this." And she repeated, "You know." And I remember sobbing, and I just felt like this confirmation from God that I had already been feeling, but it just felt like, you need to be a part of this movement. So I applied to become a part of a chapter, had no idea that it would lead into becoming president of one. And they called me the next day and told me that I could go be a part of WVU's chapter, which is about an hour away from us. And that wasn't really something I was interested just because it's such a long drive. But then a few days later, they called back and said, "Hey, we have an opportunity to get you a part of the first ever online chapter for Turning Point USA." And I was just in awe. And I got hooked up with 2 other students at Liberty University online. And it's all history from there.
So how is that going with the process of building the first ever online chapter of Turning Point USA?
It's a lot more difficult than one would think. I would like to think that it's probably more difficult than an in-person chapter, just because you have the issues with the social distancing, if you say, with being online. So you can't do some of the games or whatever that they would do in a normal chapter meeting. We are still in the process of getting our members joined. It's a little bit difficult because all of our communication has to be based on social media and email and messaging. So my co-president and I, we are still in the process of trying to get all these members added. Right now we have our social media accounts up and running, and I actually just recently took part in a video to send to Erica Kirk for her birthday. So that was pretty cool. But we are looking forward to the next couple months of having our first ever meeting once we get all of our students added.
So, one of Charlie Kirk's biggest things was that he really felt strongly about the next generation. And as I said, you are a part of that next generation. Your generation is going to, I believe, help determine the direction of this country. When we first started on the program today, one of the statistics that I gave is that 4% of young adults in America, they're the only ones of that group holding a biblical value or biblical worldview, I should say. And that number is from 70% in the 2000s to 4% today. There has been that much of a decline. So what do you think is happening out there in our world that's causing such a huge drop in the amount of young people that are now looking to God and looking to faith as their anchor?
Well, I think we've kind of been led astray. Your generation, the generation above us, they've I feel like they've been lost. They've gotten lost in the identity and the confusion of this world. We see issues with homosexuality. We see issues with social media. Just all of these different wars that are raging in our minds. And it's kind of like this confusion of where do we go? Which way do we walk? And unfortunately, that means that a lot of them don't choose the path of God. But I also want to give hope that there's also a big portion of my generation that, especially after Charlie died, we are being awakened. And, I'm not speaking for the entirety of the generation because obviously you always have the ones that are lost, and that 4% stat does not lie. However, I believe that this is the generation that's we're going to be a part of something great, and we're going to lead a lot of hearts back to Christ.
As a father, Faith, I not only hope that's true, but I believe that's true. And of course, I want nothing better or nothing less nothing less. Yeah, that's a better way of saying it. Nothing less than for you and your generation to impact this world and to make such a huge difference. But there, and I say this, there is such a weapon formed. For instance, one of the things we talked about was how anxiety and depression amongst your age group has doubled in a single decade. And a lot of young people are taking their lives. It's up 60%. Suicide rates among young people up 60%. There is, as you said, in confusion as it's related to identity. That one of the things we said is that the young people today, and it's so sad that they feel like they have no meaning or no purpose in life. What has to change?
Well, to give, kind of like a personal story for me, I was homeschooled and for 9 years. And my freshman year, whenever I finally went to public school, I remember feeling this disconnect from my peers because I had grown up in a house that I was protected from the outside world. And I'm very thankful for that. I didn't have social media. I just recently got that only because of Turning Point USA and my connections to that. But I remember going into the hallways and feeling just this darkness cover and walk into the classrooms and feel the same thing. And, every year I had this depressed feeling. But my junior year, I remember every night all I wanted to do was curl up on my bed in a ball in darkness. And, my outlet was always music. So I would listen to Christian music and it would always help me. But to say that my generation has been cursed with this lonely, depressed, confused feeling is an understatement, because it's heavier than just a feeling. It's something that goes deeper. And, for me, it was important that I was founded and grounded, per se, in my faith. That's really what got me through those dark seasons. But you have these kids walking the hallways, the stores, everywhere out in public. And there's this deep comparison that everybody feels. And it stems more like a jealousy, but also when your identity is not found in God, you are led astray. And when those dark seasons hit you and you're not grounded in God, all you know to do is to become depressed and listen to the lies of the enemy. And that's why we see suicide rates higher. So I think the issue is deeper. It's a household not raised on God.
So it's the breakdown, in your opinion, the breakdown of the family.
Right. And honestly, Charlie believed the same thing. He believed that if your family, he believed it all started with your family. If your family is not built on the ground and the foundational truth of God, then you have no foundational truth.
Mm-hmm.
So, I believe the same thing. And that's why we see such depressed and lonely people.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, for this 30-minute FM portion of our program, and what a great discussion we're having, we're going to have to wind it down. What I would love to do is, and what we're going to do, is we're going to continue this conversation on all of our podcasting platforms. And so after you listen to this, especially for those of you listening by FM radio, you got to go and subscribe. You got to go and look for the extended version of this, because we're going to continue this conversation with Faith Danielle. And also, I want to tackle the way forward. Like, how are we going to move forward? And it's about fighting for the next generation. How are we going to make that happen? What do we have to do? So we're going to talk about that as well. Before we close this out, though, Faith, you're behind the scenes right now kind of working on your own podcast called Be the One. Give us a very brief introduction to what that podcast will look like.
Yeah, so Be the One is going to be based on the foundational truth. As we've honestly been discussing, it's very similar to the discussion we are having now, but it's going to be an extension of what I believe with, America and how we are lost and how we need to get back to Christ. It's about standing up, standing out, and waiting patiently for what God has in store for us. It's all about for such a time as this. And God has a great plan for us, and that's kind of where we want to direct that.
So Faith is working on that right now. It will also be under the Legacy Living umbrella, as a part of the Legacy Living Media umbrella. I want to thank you for joining me today here on What's Important Now. If you've been encouraged, or if this program has opened your eyes to what's happening in our nation, make sure you subscribe, share. You can do so on Spreaker, Apple Podcast, or Spotify, so that you never, ever miss an episode. And if you'd like to support the program, you can join our supporter club on Spreaker for just $5 a month. And if you can't join right now, that's okay. You can still help us grow by simply sharing this episode with a friend. As always, fight the good fight of faith. Contend for the faith. There is a cause. It does matter, and it is important. Now, I'm Tom Sears. Find the extended version on all podcasting platforms. Until next time, God bless.